Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Winback, and on today's episode of our Grim Dawn Ultimate Lore playthrough, we're taking a trip to the Foggy Bank, Whitemeyer, a whole bunch of caves, gonna meet some cultists, gonna find some lore, and continue on adventuring as we do. But to kick things off, let's start talking to some fancy guys hiding out under a tree who sell stuff and give you rings made of snakeskin. Now, Torben here is going to give you a ring that you are going to turn into him for quest completion with some slith necklaces. The ring isn't especially useful after normal, but you know what, it's always side quest XP, it's completely worth it. But we can talk to Kuldo as well, the second dude hanging out in the middle of the camp here, and this is a lore-rich, hat-wearing rover guy. So, this is really the first exposure to the rovers, the reliquary, all that legend, and the first little snippet that we get of the Arcovian stuff that's coming up in Act 2. Now, the legend of King Rowan is he was the king of Arcovia in its glory days, but he was approached by a god who was wandering the world of Cairn, and they told him that basically a huge curse and terrible stuff was going to befall his kingdom, so he needed to pack up all of his shit and leave. Now, ultimately he did that, and a lot of his loyal followers came with him, but not everybody did. Most of the citizenry stayed behind in the kingdom. So, not to spoil anything, but the god that he met was Mogdrogan, the wolf. And that is actually a celestial boss that is going to come up way later in the game, but for now, just remember, he's really the nature god. He's like the savagery, bestial. He's a big angry guy if you try to punch him right away, but he's kind of manageable sometimes when he doesn't have a temper on. Now, a little bit more importantly, Kuldo actually starts to tell us about the beginnings of the cult of Cthon. What he tells us really is that they were kind of a garage band type of cult, hiding out in basements, you know, worshipping in the dark places, and the Emperor's Nightblades would actually hunt them down and kill them, so the cult could never get very big. But since the Grim Dawn has happened, they've kind of erupted into being, and we're going to see a lot more of them through this episode in some side quests and some other cool stuff that happens. Kuldo also mentions the ethereals, the beginnings of them piercing the veil and making their way into the mortal realm, but the ethereals are basically servants of the gods on the other side of reality, and they got sick of that. Nobody wants to be a servant when they have powers like those, so they broke through, causing the Grim Dawn, and then started eating all of our soul. Well, I guess they don't eat our souls, they more just wear our bodies and park us in there with them. Good stuff. Now, through that explanation, we did manage to kill Negan, who is always posted up on top of that little nook over in Whitemeyer. He's the last of the three that Harmon asked us to kill in the beginning of the game for the Something for Nothing quest. And when we go tell him about it, he doesn't want some self-righteous lecture about how they were men at one point. He just wants to know that the zombies are dead, and then immediately turns around to give us another quest to kill some happy old innkeepers who have turned into mutants with blades for hands that just obviously don't run a very nice inn anymore. Before we go hunting down some lovable innkeeper mutants, though, we are going to go down into this basement and meet the Cultists of Cthon for the very first time. Pay no attention to the fact that they explode almost instantaneously. They're a bunch of real bad dudes. And they've dropped us the Strange Key, which is going to open up a quest for us to run through later on in this video, but keep an eye on that. The Strange Key is a random drop. It does drop in one of two areas in the first act of the game, but the side quest is really, really good. And we now have to talk to Isaac on his deathbed about how he was just chopped up, according to him. All the good parts taken, so that the cult of Cthon could try to summon a harbinger.
The time has come to strike at our ethereal nemesis in Whitemeyer. Even now, we gather our forces in the hills above Burwich for an assault on the village. However, before that can happen, we must first secure Whitemeyer so that there are no enemies at our back. Though strong, loyal, and ready to die in the name of Cthon, I believe you have insufficient bloodbound to overcome the Ethereal's presence. We've had great success recently in bringing forth more powerful servants of Cthon from the void. A single Harbinger could wipe out all of the Ethereals in Whitemeyer and even take on Devil's Crossing, which could serve as a stronghold for our order in this region. To bring forth the Harbinger, you will need the blood and lives of at least 3 men. Gather the sacrifices however you see fit, either from refugees on the road, rover camps, or chosen amongst your own bloodbound. Inform me of your success when it is complete.
This one in particular has a devotion shrine in it, so pick this up, add it to your stack. And this is available on all the difficulties, so don't worry about getting ultimate blocked by that. We're doing a lot of cave exploring still, but there is a corpse inside this cavern which will give you another starter weapon. It is a dagger. That is the Slith Tongue. Well, it's about as good as all the other starter weapons, so if you're at this point in the game and you're looking for something like that on normal in your first playthrough and you're very small level, feel free. I mean, it's always on that corpse. It's definitely got its uses, and I could see it being pretty good with an offhand weapon if you're trying to get some kind of caster build started, or just some really quick stabby stuff. Now, within Whitemeyer and the Foggy Bank, there are tons of side quests, including the Luther Graves side quest, and the one on the screen right now that we are trying to accomplish is Isaac's quest. We gotta go find his stump full of his belongings, mostly his special pointy soldiers, because he wanted to reward us for being there to, see his last breath. That's super morbid, but I understand, buddy. I'll get your shoulders. They're not the worst thing in the world. Again, it's another kind of starter piece of armor, and it works really, really, really well in normal on your first playthrough. But in ultimate, I'd be pretty happy, I'd feel pretty safe about selling them. No big deal there. I don't believe that they're used for any specific crafting or blueprints, so you should be all set. After taking care of Isaac's last wish, though, we can dive down into the other caverns. One of them is basically empty of big important stuff, but it does have a little boss called Primordian, which you'll see right now. He is pretty tanky. He's a big slith boy, but he does occasionally drop a monster infrequent that is definitely useful. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get that this playthrough, or, at least in this moment, unless I want to go farm him, but I really don't feel like that's necessary, so it's fine. Everything is fine. But that's really all that there is in this cave. It's just kind of a slith cave. It's got Primordian in it. It's a level 1 time waster / distraction technique, but explore. You can do it. It's all worth it, I promise. And then after we deal with Primordian, we can head upward onto the Foggy Bank to try and find Luther Graves, who has been abducted by the Slith and is probably going to be eaten within, his very short lifetime. But all we got to do is send him back to Devil's Crossing, and then he'll become our new shopkeeper. One of 2 shopkeepers, actually, because there is another guy who sells scrap stuff, but Luther's the only one I ever pay attention to because it saved his life, and we have a connection, okay? We have built a relationship, we trust each other. And don't go trying to extort the man for his well-gotten gains because he's trapped. It's the apocalypse. Don't be a dick. I mean, unless you're really desperate. But at that point, then you probably did something wrong along the way. So now we're making our way underneath the bridge. Well, you can repair the bridge, obviously pick it up when you have enough materials to do so, but going to the flooded passage down here is much more eventful. And there is a side area slash side quest place with some Act 2 lore in it, which is another reason that we're venturing down in here. But I think the flooded passage is always worth it. And there is a devotion shrine down here. So if you don't have the devotion shrine picked up in the flooded passage, don't skip it. Devotions are super important, and you definitely need them. Now, on the topic of side quests and caves and extra areas in the flooded passage, you'll need some dynamite to get to the next one coming up. And if we're being perfectly honest, I think we're doing it out of order because this may be an Act 2 side mission that we're supposed to come back to once we have a little bit of a knowledge about how the Arcovian city and history works. But you know what? Damn it all to hell, because it's in front of me. I gotta read it. I gotta do the voices. I have to live out my voice acting fantasies, no matter how bad they are. That, and there is a lot of cool stuff hiding out in the sunken reliquary, as it is called in game. There is a big chest. I think it's called a resplendent chest. I can't actually remember. And there is tons of enemies to fight that are from Act 2 in this area. So you can find yourself some ghostly monster infrequents, especially if you're playing first time through. Those are incredibly good for necromancer characters, so keep an eye open for those. But let's go take on Roldorathis and his cronies. The boss here, the Roldorathis High Priest, the High Priest Roldorathis, is pretty tanky, and he's doing mostly cold damage. So if you're not super equipped for that, like, you know, getting frozen and whatnot, you're gonna have to play like me and be super careful, because if you get stuck, you definitely can be killed if you're playing in Ultimate. But yeah, we're doing a decent amount of damage still with this build. Still really confident in it lasting as long as it needs to, but we're still keeping an eye out for some open gear and lore notes, which are coming up. What have you got to say, High Priest Roldorathis?
The end of days is upon us. Glorious Arcovia, beacon of the west, is crumbling from within. But fear not, brothers and sisters, for we are the chosen of Ishtar. Here upon the sacred ground of our forefathers, all shall be safe from the ruin brought about by the hubris of the oligarchs. Here we shall outlast the immortal plague and return to the surface as the second dawn of man. It is with a heavy heart that I seal the entrance to our temple. May Ishtar have mercy on the damned souls beyond these walls. They will find no solace here. The blessings of Ishtar have failed us. The wards did not protect us. The curse of Arcovia has found its way here. We are dying, yet we cannot die. My brothers and sisters tear at each other in their growing madness, only to rise again to renew the carnage once more. The gods have abandoned us. This wasn't to be our salvation. This was to be our tomb.
Yeah, so, you know, spoilers for Act 2, maybe, kinda, if you did it this way, but, you know, if you're playing it on normal, the fluid way, the way you're supposed to do it the first time, and you're doing everything that you can possibly do, then you probably would have figured this out in the space that you're supposed to. But we're not about that. We're playing on Ultimate. We're just clicking stuff that we can click, especially monster shrines that are full of green stuff. Oh, that's a lot of green stuff. Always remember when you're playing, though, monster shrines, even if they're not giving you great gear, they are always going to be a really good gauge of where your build is at. So if you're playing something like I am, sometimes you just want to click those things to make sure that everything that you're working with is still stacking up the way that it is intended to. And I can happily say that with my build, I am still very, very comfortable. And since we cleared that monster shrine so quick, I'm not going to get worried about where my build is at right now. The devotion shrine itself actually giving more stuff than the monster shrine did, so that's fantastic. And some extra experience is always going to be nice and cozy. But let's make our way over to the Shambler, the big boss of the Flooded Passage. He is pretty simple, pretty slow moving, easy to dodge attacks, but you can definitely get punched to death if you get hit with a stun or, you know, one rock tremor combo. Usually he'll drop a monster infrequent called the Shambler's Heart, which is incredibly good for, I think, Force Wave users, possibly Force Wave and Blitz users. But if you didn't find it and you're playing Soldier, you may want to give it another go, because it is a very strong monster infrequent. Now, after coming out of the Flooded Passage, you're going to meet Duncan, the blacksmith, which is incredibly necessary, especially on Ultimate, because you gotta have the blacksmith right away for crafting stuff, and the fact that he's not unlocked immediately is a little bit of, you know, kind of weird, but I understand why, because it's story related, right? But this is also your first kind of a no-take-backsies kind of choice. So in this quest, you can either opt to take Duncan home, have him be your blacksmith, or you can take Angrim home. Angrim is Duncan's teacher? Sure, teacher. And they both do different things when you're crafting. So if you weren't aware, when you're crafting at the blacksmith, you actually get a specific set of properties from the things that they create. So Duncan creates objects or armor, weapons, all that sort of stuff with specific magical properties, whereas Angrim has, I think he gives you more like physical damage. You know what? I'm not actually sure. I've never picked Angrim as a blacksmith, so I would have to look up what he does. But they do different things. So if you like the magical stuff, if you ever need to know what a blacksmith can do for you when they are crafting things, just hover over the little star next to the craft button, and it'll show you all the bonuses that that particular blacksmith imbues into the stuff that they create. So that is true for Duncan, that is true for the blacksmiths in Homestead, at Fort Icon, the Mammoth Resistance, all that stuff. All of that has special properties when you are crafting. And would you believe it, we have another lore note from the Scouts of Devil's Crossing, the Burwitch Reconnaissance Report. I wonder what information they have for us.
I pray one of us makes it through this nightmare to deliver the report. The lives of those hiding in Devil's Crossing may depend on it. As instructed, my team has braved the wilderness of Whitemeyer and made it to the outskirts of Burwitch. The situation there is worse than we feared. We encountered no survivors, and the ethereal takeover of the region is now complete. What we found baffling, however, is the heavy concentration of enemy activity within Burwitch itself. In our previous encounters with the ethereals, they seem unfocused, spread out across the wilderness in no predictable pattern. But this seems almost deliberate, as if they were swayed to keep watch over something important. I regret to report that without a larger force at our disposal, even breaching the city walls would incur heavy casualties and thin our already struggling ranks. While I understand completely that our situation is dire and we are desperate for a new source of supplies and food, I cannot recommend a direct engagement with the enemy force at Burwitch. It's a suicide mission. We need to be prepared for the eventuality that the enemy gathered at Burwitch will mobilize upon Devil's Crossing. Should it come to that, we must be prepared to flee once more. Scout Talna.
Now, I mentioned the strange key earlier in the side quest that you get from that. There is another way to get the strange key, but that ultimately you get from another side quest that you will unlock later on in the first act playthrough. So in order to maintain some continuity for this video series, we're just going to let that rock. But just remember, there is 2 to 3 ways that you can pick up the key and head down into the dungeon here. Now, when we get down into the dungeon, we can see a bit more of the depravity and the fanaticism of the Cult of Cthon. This is ultimately where the cult is stockpiling their forces in Act 1, and we can see all the harbingers, the demons, all the bloodletting, actually the more disturbing parts of the cult that you don't get to see as much upstairs out in the open. Now this is where some of the existential horror sits in for this game, because you're the last bastions of humanity, and you are trapped between terrible fate and potentially even worse fate. Depending on how you'd like to live the rest of your life, you can either be a refugee living off scraps trying to get back to some sense of society, or you can become a meat puppet who has no control over your body and might actually get turned into a huge mound of talking flesh, which is even more gross when I say it out loud. Or you could just be grinded down into nothingness. The followers of Cthon, like old Salazar here, the Blade of Cthon, are out to just wipe humanity out of existence, turn us all back into the blood that we stole from Cthon, or something like that. I haven't really figured out all the lore behind Cthon just yet, but basically, it's super nihilistic. The cult hates how humanity's gone, and they want to squish us all back into blood, send us back to the great tentacle god in the sky. Now, don't forget, when you are inside the secret cave, the depraved sanctuary with the secret key, the strange key, you have a bunch of boxes to pick up here once you've killed Salazar. Remember, he is a smidge tougher in Ultimate than he is in other difficulties, so if you just face tanked him in Elite and Normal, unless you have just kind of a face tank build, you're probably going to want to do a little bit of dodging, and you definitely want to kill his Harbinger first, because something about those big floaty bastards will take all of your resistances away from you, or at least a big chunk, and then Salazar will punch you into next year. So it's good stuff to just get in the habit of dodging in Ultimate, because big bosses do big damage. Just big damage. But we are not out of the woods yet. Metaphorically or physically speaking, we actually have to go through the woods some more, because there are a couple more caverns and offshoots in this area of the game that we need to get off of our checklist. The first one is going to be the Smuggler's Basin, and this is a teeny little cavern full of a really, really big, angry, dangerous boss. Gutworm the Man-Eater is definitely something that you need to stay pretty far away from. Melee range is terrible. As you can see, I lost almost all of my health in I think a single attack from him. So if you are not well equipped to survive a lot of stuff, getting punched by that man is going to hurt quite a bit. Luckily, he's a bit of a pushover if you can keep your range and do enough damage to him, but my god, I've never been so terrified for my butt. Well, that's not true. That's probably like the 4th or 5th time I've been terrified for my butt in this playthrough. But the second cavern out here is the second burial cave, and the first burial cave is where we met Kazog for John Bourbon in the beginning of the game. But this one doesn't have any big bosses in it. It does, however, have a monster, or not a monster shrine, a devotion shrine for us to add to our collection. So we're just going to activate that here in a second, pick up a devotion point for an Aether Shard, and put it on the list. We've got quite a few of them out of the way now, but Act 1 is chock full. I think there is 11 in total in Act 1, and just because they're in Act 1 doesn't mean they're necessarily accessible in Act 1, but they are all located there, so since we're in Ultimate, we should be able to find them, as well as Ulgrim just hanging out in the middle of the swamp on an island all of his own, cooking his heart away, and we just portal him back to Devil's Crossing because we're good people. That's what we do here. Actually, there it is. There's the lore note, Alistair's diary, all up in this broken down house. Let's see what this little booger has to say.
First entry. Mama told me to write this thing, so I suppose now is as good as ever, seeing as I'm grounded again. So I pulled Abigail's hair. She started it. Why doesn't she have to sit in her room and write in her stupid diary? Tomorrow I'll catch the biggest frog I can find in the marshes and leave it in Sister's room. We'll see how she likes that. Second entry. So Mama's been reading my diary and now I'm grounded again. A frog got out before Sister even saw it. Why isn't Papa home yet? He was supposed to take me out to Burwitch today and he's still not back from business. Alistair's diary, third entry. Mama's saying I'm not allowed to play outside anymore. Perkins said there are monsters roaming the marshes, but Mama said there is no such thing, and she whooped me with the ladle for talking rumors again. I wish Papa'd come home already. I won't go to Burwitch. Alistair's diary, fourth entry. I'm scared. I'm really scared. Mama locked me and Sister in my room while she checked out some noises behind the house. It's been forever, and now I hear noises inside the house, too. Papa, please come home and make the noises go away. I don't care about Burwitch anymore. Just please come home, Papa.
And there you have it. That's the Grim Dawn from the perspective of a small, scared, frog-abducting, kind of a dick child. And that, in and of itself, is absolutely more ambiance of the creeper variety for Grim Dawn. All of the lore, all of the background noise that you don't get to see, building up to these big set pieces, big areas, big boss fights. Just never going to get any less cool to me. But that is going to about do it for this video. We've got a little bit left, but nothing too important. Just got to go back to town, sell off all of our green stuff, and tell you what's in store. On the next episode here, we'll be exploring through Burwitch Village, the abandoned waterfront, and the East Marsh, which is a side quest area, a dangerous domain full of stuff, and the final path of the hidden path that we can't actually access just yet, but I'll show you where it is, and I'll show you everything happening out in the marshes full of trolls and demon dogs and cultists, because there is the Burwitch Cathedral out in the East Marsh, which is going to add a little bit more spice to the chthonic cultist lore. It's pretty fantastic, all things considered. But yeah, so that's it for me, everybody. I will see you all next week. Thank you so much for hanging out. Catch you later.